Hi, welcome back to Departure from Reality. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle.
And today we are going to be discussing the third installment in the Lord of the Rings franchise, The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah, we're sorry it took us so long to get back to doing episodes. We wanted this one to come out closer to the actual anniversary in December.
Yeah.
But
You know,
things got in the way.
Life.
Yeah, work and such. And then we figured, new year, let's just jump right into it, get the episode recorded right away.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
No, that didn't. Why did that not happen, Kyle?
Because we discovered a new fixation.
Yes, we did.
Both of us.
Because we are like that.
Yeah. We have a friend who has been trying for years to get us into Magic the Gathering. He used to work with us years past, and ever since then, he and I played video games, and we've all hung out together. And he's been a huge Magic fan for years and years and years, and he's tried to get us into it multiple times. And I've always just kind of pushed it off as that's something I don't really want to get into. There's a lot involved, and I'm not sure about it. But last year, they came out with a Lord of the Rings set, a whole bunch of cards themed around Lord of the Rings. And that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Okay, maybe I really should give this a shot. And I got a deck at the end of last year and started looking into it, learning the rules. And I was properly intrigued by it to the point where I was like, okay, Jessica's got a birthday coming up. That seems like a good excuse to get her a deck and force her to learn how to play this game with me. And so I did.
And so, to be fair, yes. So I had a birthday at the beginning of January, age undisclosed. So he gives me this gift. I open it up and I'm like, cool. I feel like I played it off really well. I hope I played it off really well. But I was like, for real?
You played it off as genuinely interested.
Oh, good. I wasn't.
Yeah, I figured you weren't.
Yeah.
But
I was like, so how I am with games, when I start a new game, I don't want to do it because right off the bat, it just seems overwhelming. It's too much and I don't want to do it. I don't want to learn something new. I'm comfortable with what I already know. Don't give me more. And so I didn't want to do it. And Kyle is the kind of person who loves to talk about things and he overtalks it to death. And you can't tell me how to play a game by talking about it because my brain is just I turned it off the moment you started talking. I don't know what you're saying. It's another language. Yeah. And so if I'm going to learn a game, we just need to sit and we need to start playing. I'm going to ask you questions along the way. You're basically going to be playing two hands for the first couple games. And that's how I'm going to learn, by playing. And it's exactly what happened. I sat down to play my first game for Kyle. Not excited. I even told my husband where I was going and I'm like, I'm doing this for Kyle. I don't even care about this anymore after that. I'm just going to do it for him. And then, what do you know? I was hooked. It was freaking amazing.
You played it off very well.
Oh, good.
You seemed cautiously optimistic about it.
Okay.
As if maybe it could be fun, but I won't know until I play it, which honestly, you didn't know until you played it. So, yeah. It was fair. You were technically lying to yourself at the same time.
I was. You're right. But that's how it is with all games. You guys taught me Catan 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to learn that game because, like I said, everything looks complicated, even if it's not super complicated. I just don't want to get into the weeds of learning it because that feels hard to me, even though once I start playing, it's not. It seems overwhelming to get into new things.
Yeah.
And books, I'll read my same comfort books over and over when I'm in those kind of moods instead of starting something new because it's a comfort thing,
Yeah, because I just learned how to play. I think I'd had one session prior to that where I'd actually played the game.
Yeah.
And other than that, I'd played a little bit digitally, the actual video game version of Magic. And so having learned as little as I had, knowing that I had to then teach someone that I wanted to get into it with me, it was a little bit daunting, and I was hoping that I would do it justice. And I think by the end, I explained enough that, you were hooked by the end.
I was, and I think it helps that, Kyle and Chad, they were on standby.
Yeah, yeah.
And you were totally just texting them, what does this card mean? And I'm sorry, I'm going to say it now. For all of you Magic fans who are if you read the card says what it is,
Yeah, reading the card explains the card.
Yes, reading the card explains the card. When you are new at Magic, reading the card doesn't do shit, okay? You can read it all day long and be like, cool, still don't know what I'm supposed to do. Yeah. Don't know what this card does. I don't know how this card interacts with the other cards.
Yeah. Reading the card explains the card if you understand, pretty much everything else there is to do with Magic.
Yeah.
But if you're brand new,
yes,
reading the card is one of the most confusing things to do. So Yeah.
So, Boogie, if I hear you say reading the card explains the card while we're playing a game, I'm probably going to just sweep all the cards onto the floor.
There's a little bit of a curve when getting into it, figuring out just how literal the text is when it comes to the rules on the cards.
Yeah.
Because quite often it is very, very literal. Like a rule can say you may do something, and some rules will say this happens. And it's like, okay. And brand new players have no idea. People who've played it quite a bit, they read it and they understand.
Yeah.
Because reading the card to them explains the card to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is definitely a learning curve.
And it helps that we can play on Magic the Gathering Arena.
Yes.
Because that's really helped me learn how to play. Because you and I have only played together twice now. We didn't even finish one of those games.
Yeah.
But like on Steam, you and I have played together a ton.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also played others on Steam, like just online. And I've also played against the computer on Steam. And that has helped me learn so much. So if anybody out there is like, oh, I'm kind of interested, but it's a huge undertaking to, spend the money on the cards, get Magic the Gathering Arena. You can download it to your phone or you can play it on Steam.
Yep.
So good.
It's free. It's 100% free. We're not sponsored by them.
Yeah, not at all.
We're not getting any money for this.
No.
But just the fact that we enjoy this game so much, we're going to give a shout out to this game
Yes.
that doesn't need a shout out from us.
Right?
But yeah, if you're interested, give Arena a shot. It's a really, really good way to learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're super hooked. It's consumed our lives for the last month, and we finally had to be like, all right, we need to get the next episode out, so let's focus on that.
Yeah. And if you're like, well, I mean, that's cool. Like, he got into it because of Lord of the Rings, but I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. For one, why are you listening to this episode? But two, they have Doctor Who, guys. I liked the Lord of the Rings, and the art is really cool on Lord of the Rings. But I got so excited about the Doctor Who set. I went and bought myself the Villains Commander deck. I love it so much.
Yeah, and there have been a few other crossovers. Some have been full sets like Lord of the Rings. Others have been just the Commander decks, like with Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And then there have been a few where it's just a handful of cards, unfortunately. They did a slight crossover with The Walking Dead. They've got just a couple cards from them.
And a couple cards from Arcane.
There's a few cards from there. But yeah, we're hoping they continue with the collaboration stuff, because as interesting as I'm sure the lore of the world of Magic the Gathering is by itself, that's something that I feel I need to take in gradually, because right off the bat, nothing about that lore is really pulling me in.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's going to need to be something that I am drawn in towards gradually.
Yeah.
Whereas if they do more collaborations with things that we are already interested in, I mean, that's the fastest way for them to go after my money.
How awesome would it be if they created like a whole Stormlight or even just Cosmere, sets?
That would be so, so good.
Right?
It'd be so good. From what I've learned, most sets have one planeswalker in them, which, if you don't know anything about Magic the Gathering, the lore of Magic the Gatherings, they are a character that has the ability to go kind of like, in terms of multiversing, they're able to go from different universes to different universes, I think. Or I guess just different worlds to different worlds. I'm not exactly sure. But I mean, the name kind of implies what they are. They're
world hoppers.
So the Cosmere technically already has a few good options for that.
Yes,
if they were to do a crossover. And if they were to only pick one, because it seems like most sets only do one, I mean, I feels like Hoyd should be the most obvious choice there. I mean, he'd be the perfect choice for their one planeswalker.
Mm-hmm.
And then they could have a commander deck based on like a few different books. They could have a Mistborn commander deck. They could have a Stormlight commander deck.
They'd have tons of flyers.
Oh, they would. They would. Oh, man.
It'd be so good.
It would be.
I would love it. They need to get someone to, collaborate.
That would be amazing. I would love.
I'm free if they need help with the collaboration. I mean, clearly I know so much about Magic the Gathering. So
I mean, it's a good way to learn. I feel like if you're explaining something that you know in collaboration with people who know things that they understand really well, and you're trying to combine those two things, I mean, by the end, they're going to know a lot about the Cosmere, and you're going to know a lot more about Magic the Gathering.
Right?
So I feel like that's a really good deal there.
Right. So if anybody, can get me in touch with the people.
Yeah. If Brandon Sanderson
I'm free.
And Wizards of the Coast could reach out to us, we're available.
Yes. We could do this for them.
Happy to discuss salary and work hours and all that stuff. Compensation.
We will need
benefits.
to set time aside during work hours to, of course, play Magic the Gathering.
I feel like
we're
that's
going to have
important.
to test these cards out, really make sure they work.
There will need to be multiple games during the day where we test the cards out. And obviously, just to make sure that they're actually viable for user consumption.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
gonna need to bring some of them home just to make sure that they try them out in different sleeves, different deck boxes, on
Right.
different tables and play mats.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then keep them when we're done because, I mean, we've played with them. We've touched them. They're ours.
Yeah, they're not mint anymore. You don't want those back.
Exactly.
I mean, what's the
Nobody wants
point?
those.
Yeah, ew. Yeah. We're fully and completely obsessed.
Yeah, check it out. I think you guys would be too.
After we're done recording here, we're just going to go downstairs and play.
We are.
Magic the Gathering, 100%.
My husband has no idea what's about to come.
Oh, man. And for anyone listening who does play Magic the Gathering and is excited, last night I just pulled an Orcish Bowmaster from a pack, and I'm really excited. It's a really expensive card, and I'm super happy to throw it into my Mordor deck. Anyway, that's nothing to do with anything. I just wanted to throw that out there because I'm really excited about that card.
Yeah. And then, when he told me how much his was, I was like, oh, I should see how much mine are from my booster packs. Yeah, they're basically like 1 cent. So feeling really happy about that.
Yeah, that's the ups and downs of the booster packs.
Yeah, well, you've spent a lot of money so far. So
I have.
It was about time you got one that was like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we got off on a tangent there, but I think we should get back to the topic on hand.
What was the topic on hand?
Dude, Return of the King, man.
Oh, that's
We
right.
didn't stray too far.
You're right. We were in the Lord of the Rings realm somewhere in there.
Somewhere.
Oh,
But
man.
we've made it to the Return of the King. We have done the entire trilogy now, and I'm very excited about that.
Yes. It feels right to start I should say, it feels weird to say start because, even though this is only episode 4, we've been working on this for months now, but it does feel right to have the first few episodes of our series to be about Lord of the Rings.
It really does. I mean, I know we started this idea of a podcast because we were so into talking about the Cosmere at the time. And we're like, well, why don't we just start recording it? But yeah, it felt right when we were both like, what is our first episode going to be? It was Lord of the Rings all the way.
Yeah.
And we've made it. We've made it through the trilogy now. And I hope you guys have stuck with us through this.
Well, we're not through yet. We got to finish this one. Then we'll be through. But yes, we're here. We're at the finale of Lord of the Rings. Technically, I mean, we might do other Tolkien stuff later, but this is officially Lord of the Rings trilogy, last entry. We're excited to actually properly get into this one.
Yes.
So like I said earlier, we wanted to get this out closer to the 20th anniversary of Return of the King on the 17th of December, but that obviously didn't happen.
Yep.
But that said, the fact that this movie is now 20 years old it's crazy to me.
I know. It's insane. I mean, do you remember where you were 20 years ago?
I was 9. No, I don't know what I was doing 9 years old.
Oh, you were a baby.
I think.
Okay, I was only like 15, 16. Wait, how old am I? Never mind. I was nothing.
People doing math.
She just had a birthday.
Oh, man. We're going to dox ourselves on the internet.
I know,
We're going to find all
right?
our information.
Fantastic.
But yeah, the Return of the King was so good. And I mean, out of all 3 movies, Return of the King is the one that won awards. But I think the reason it won awards was because it's sort of like they wanted to give the series awards. But
Yeah.
it feels right because Tolkien tried to publish it all as one book anyway.
Yeah.
It only came out in 3 because his publishers were like, this is too much.
And then Brandon Sanderson entered the world and was like, I don't care.
Yeah, let's take a look at that. Too much? What does too much mean?
Yeah. Gonna push the limits on that.
Yeah, but it blows my mind to this day how many awards Return of the King won at the Oscars. 11 awards.
It was nominated for 11 and it won in all of its categories.
Every single category.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And I think in history, we looked this up when we were doing the notes, there are only like 2 other films that have won all 11 awards at the Academies.
Yeah. It was Ben-Hur and Titanic.
Yep. I mean, that's crazy company to keep. I mean,
Right?
Ben-Hur is like, they study that film in schools like to this day. And I mean, Titanic is freaking Titanic. That's James Cameron's magnum opus.
Seriously, yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's still an amazing movie. I will still occasionally throw on Titanic and be like, they did so good with this movie. The acting, the directing, everything was just phenomenal.
It's crazy you bring that up because I do that with Return of the King.
Crazy. I should watch that movie. Sounds good.
I recommend it.
Good.
But yeah, it's such a good movie. Completely deserving of all of its awards.
Yeah, it took $1.14 billion at the box office, the highest grossing film of 2003, and at the time it was the second highest grossing film.
That's crazy.
It remains on the list though. It's like at number 27 right now
Of like all films ever?
of all films ever. It's still at the list at 27.
It's crazy to me that it's down at 27.
I know, but we've had all those big blockbusters since then.
That's
you know,
true.
like
That's true.
like the Marvel, the DC, all that crap.
Yeah.
It's not crap. All that stuff.
Just reflex to say crap.
I said it after I said DC. Okay, so
That's a fair pairing, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, this movie, it stands to this day as a testament to the passion that Peter Jackson and all the actors and writers and prop makers and makeup artists and just everyone, every single individual who worked in this movie, it's a testament to the fact that passion is what creates good movies.
exactly, and it should be, I mean, a testament to Hollywood itself, who likes to hire just, you know, people who aren't fans and don't care to write and direct these films, when in reality they should be looking for fans, because this is the kind of stuff that fans are going to whip up for you. Like something that we're still talking about 20 years later that still stands up to modern day films.
Yeah.
I mean, not completely, but pretty close.
But no, they got to try and run it like a business, what's going to make them the absolute most money, regardless of the quality of the content or how much it deviates from the source material. If we're hitting these check boxes, then we're most likely going to make the biggest amount of money possible.
Exactly.
Regardless of the product.
Yeah, and Witcher is a good example of that. It only ran for 3 seasons, and that sucks. We won't ever have another Witcher again. And like, I mean, they drove him away, Henry Cavill away, and that sucks.
It's fine, though, because he's off to do something else that he's really excited about. He's going to be working, I don't remember if it's going to be a show or a movie, but he's working on an adaptation of Warhammer 40K. I know he's super excited about it.
He is. Yeah, I read an article about that yesterday.
Yeah, so I'm glad he's he's in a better place.
He is in a better place. It just sucks that Geralt of Rivia is gone.
Well, I hope, despite the fact that they've passed the mantle, quote unquote, over to someone else, I hope that at some point it gets a resurgence with Cavill back at the helm.
That'd be good.
I don't know how they do it, but weirder things have been done in the past where they hop between actors. I mean, Connery came back and played 007 like a few years after he stopped playing 007 anyway.
Oh, there you go.
So,
and
I mean,
it's not like any of us are really going to watch the seasons with whatever his name is. So why does it?
I think,
We didn't need to mention him. So it's
he didn't do anything wrong in this scenario.
In this scenario, you're right.
I mean, I don't know much about him. So
let's just. Anyway, so back to Return of the King.
Oh, man.
But since we're, being a little nostalgic about this being 20 years, and I kind of asked, do you remember 20 years ago? Well, I do, because I was a teenager. And even though it's been like 20 years and 2 months basically since the movie came out, I remember opening night. We went to, movies used to actually come out on Fridays, instead of like Thursdays. And after school, we all piled in the minivan, and Mom drove us around to, I think we went to 3 or 4 different theaters. We live in a bigger city, so we have options. So we drove around, and finally on the 4th theater, we found tickets for our large family. I mean, we didn't sit together, and we had to wait in line, I think, for over an hour before we even got into the theater. But, I mean, we saw it.
See, I remember you telling me about this, because I don't remember this night at all. I have a few childhood memories of going to the theaters. I remember going to see the first Harry Potter film, for instance.
Yeah, I remember that too.
That stuck in my mind because that was the first time I stood in a long line of people to get into a movie, and just listening to the people ahead of and behind us talk about it and how excited they were to see the movie.
That was before Dad died, so Dad went with us too.
I don't know why that stuck in my head and this one didn't, but between the two movies.
Well, that was more of like what is that? Inside Out. What do they call that?
A core memory.
Because that was your first time doing something, so that created a core memory.
That's fair, actually. Yeah. I didn't consider it like that. But yeah, I don't have a specific crisp memory of us going from theater to theater trying to find open seats for Return of the King. I just remember having basically watched it my entire life.
I even remember what theater we were at. I remember I sat at the very top. And I think you sat with me because we could only sit like 2 of us together each seat. And I think you and I sat together. And then, it was so good. And I remember meeting up with everyone after, and we're like, it was so good. And Mom's like, I didn't think he'd ever throw the ring in. And I'm like, Mom, you just don't. Keep your negative thoughts to yourself.
Yeah, well, that negative thought hasn't changed.
It has not changed.
It has not changed in the least. Every time one of us is watching the movie, anyone in the family has got that on, and she walks in and Frodo's on the precipice, just about to throw the ring in. She stands there and she's just immediately infuriated by the fact that she knows it's taken him a minute just to get to this point, and she knows he's not about to do it because Gollum has to come up and tackle him.
Yeah.
She's like, just push him in already, Sam. And it's like, no, Mom, stop.
Right. Every time.
Oh, man. I love watching movies with my mom, but that one, it's just predictable every time we get to it.
Yeah.
And I've rewatched them with her before and tried to explain my perspective on how I see the movies and hopefully see if she appreciates the more emotional conflict that's going on there.
And explain to her the depth behind everything you're actually seeing.
Yeah, there's an actual internal struggle happening there, a fight happening inside of Frodo. I mean, granted, if you're just watching it just to have a good time, you're not looking into the subtext, then, I mean, yeah, he is just standing there and he's just not doing it and frustrating.
I mean, I don't think she really likes movies like this, though. Fantasy epics, even sci-fi epics like Dune. I mean, we just barely got her this past summer to sit and watch Dune, and I think she still hated it.
Yeah.
I mean, she's very jaded because of the first one that Dad made her go see.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't think she likes these epics.
Yeah, which is fair.
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
Yeah, she does like some, but it can be hit or miss with her. Regardless, she's a fun time to watch stuff with. You never know what you're going to get with her.
Oh, she always walks into the room. You're like, oh, yay. Like, push pause real quick.
Don't worry, Mom. We'll wait till you're gone.
Yeah.
We'll endure this without you. You don't have to worry about it.
But anyway, getting into the movie, in one of our last episodes, I was talking about how I'm so sick of these books, like these fantasy books talking about how weak men are. And rewatching this, I kind of bit my tongue a little bit saying that because there's an instance where I actually agree with the whole men are weak. And it's the part...
Men being humans
in general.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not bashing men.
No, but yeah, it's just because
humans.
that's the terminology he uses, like the land of men, the race of men. But it's humans. Like that's just what they...
Yeah.
Terminology.
But anyway, there's a specific part where I was like watching and I'm like, you know what? It kind of fits. The whole weakness of humans kind of fits here. And it's when they're trying to convince Theoden to go and help Gondor. And he's like, well, where was Gondor? You know? And so he's like, no. And I mean, I get it. He's salty, so it's fine. So Gandalf has to take his time to go over to Gondor to like see what's happening and like, hey, Denethor, why don't you see if Theoden will come help? And he's like, no. And so these two men, they have to wait for the beacons to be lit. I mean, not even like, you know, Denethor's mad that they were lit. And Theoden's like, okay, Gondor will go. But if they hadn't wasted this time being so prideful, less men probably would have died.
Yeah.
I mean, more of the men from Rohan might have died. But at the same time, like, they might have been able to save more lives in general if they hadn't been so prideful, if they had thought about the people under them instead of themselves.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I definitely think between the two, I mean, obviously Denethor is the more prideful of the two.
Absolutely, yes.
There's a lot more on Theoden's side of he just watched his people be slaughtered already.
It's true.
Gondor wasn't there to help them when all that happened. And he's kind of salty and he's like, my people are recovering right now. Like, why should we go help people who didn't help us? So I 1,000% see Theoden's side.
I do too. You're right. And it is mostly Denethor. Like, if he had asked for help, obviously it's clear that Theoden had been like, okay, I can't just keep saying, where were they? I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of human.
Yeah, but that's one of the reasons I love Theoden. He's a layered character because he's got those moments where we see his imposter syndrome. He feels like a fake king. Like, he doesn't think he's worthy to lead these people. And then there's moments when he's angry, when he's telling Aragorn, like, you know, why should we go help Gondor? And then when he finally gives into his own sense of honor and he's like, Rohan will answer. Just layered, a really layered character. And I love him so much. And the fact that he feels guilt for not being as good a father as he should have been to Éowyn, even though he wasn't Éowyn's father, he just knew that he was the only father figure she had. Yeah,
and in comparison to Denethor, who is a shit father.
Yeah, just
you know, to his biological
all
children.
Over Faramir.
Yes.
Ugh.
Yeah. So, I mean...
Can we drag Denethor for a bit? Because this man deserves it.
I mean, let's do it, you know, with his tomato dripping juice face.
Oh, man. Denethor is such a scumbag.
He really is.
I didn't prepare any ammunition to bash Denethor. It's just we're in this, and I'm heated because I love Theoden. And then to compare him to Denethor and being like, oh, he's such a scumbag.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, anyway, sorry. Man got what he deserved in the end, but still.
You're in your feelings right now. I'm
in my feelings. Oh, man. So good.
But yeah, Denethor, just from the moment we meet him, you can just tell, I'm not going to like him.
Yeah. Those moments that should be with a normal, well-balanced person, that should be moments where you feel like there's some actual tenderness coming out and you get to see like moments of true love and emotion between him and the people he cares for.
Yeah.
Those moments with him are twisted by the insanity that he has. Like the moments when he actually starts to worry about Faramir, he immediately tries to burn Faramir alive. He doesn't want to get Faramir help. He thinks his son is dead and he's not going to hear anyone else's opinion. And so he's going to burn his body alive, even though he has a good chance of surviving. And he's going to burn himself to death with him because Gondor is falling and there's nothing else.
Gondor's falling. Both of my sons are dead. Yeah. Like, what's the point anymore?
Flee for your lives.
What does Gandalf say?
Return to your posts.
So he just smacks him upside the head as he turns around. It's such a good scene.
Oh, I love it. But yeah, Denethor, scumbag, got what he deserved. Faramir deserved better.
I mean, he sends his son and the small little force that they have out to go and, like, you know, he's mad that he even came back to begin with.
Yeah.
So he's like, no, go out there and
go charge a fortified position. You dinguses.
Yeah,
how dare
there's
you
like
lose
100 of you and thousands of them, but get out there. I'm going to eat my lunch here while this little hobbit sings me a song.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, if that doesn't make you mad or hate him, I don't know what will.
Yeah. And honestly, if there is, for some reason, some person out there that likes Denethor as a person or a character, I'd like to sit down and have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of brain I want to pick apart. We're not going to become friends, but I'd like to understand you a little bit better.
I mean, it's probably the same people who think Snape is a good guy.
Let's not get into that.
Wrong book.
As much as I'd like to, let's not get into that because that's a very divisive conversation.
You're absolutely right. And it will happen one day when we're discussing Harry Potter.
Yeah, but that's not a conversation we can avoid. Harry Potter episodes are coming.
Yes.
And with that comes our feelings about Snape.
Yes. So prepare yourselves.
Yes, which we apologize for in advance, but at the same time, like...
No, I don't. I'm sorry. My feelings are my feelings.
I apologize for hurt feelings, not for how I feel about things. So anyway, back to Gondor, back to
Denethor.
Denethor.
Yes, he's busy with tomatoes dripping down his chin right now. I actually think those are cherries that he's eating at that point because I don't think any tomato is that...
I mean, there are cherry tomatoes, the little tiny, because it was tiny.
But those are redder, brighter red. What he had dripping down looked more like a cherry itself, one of those, I think they're called Bing cherries.
I don't know, it's just the guts that spewed out onto his cheek looked like tomato guts to me.
Well, I'm going to rewatch it now.
Okay.
Because I need to know.
Just for that scene?
Well, because, everybody says it's a tomato, and I do think he has tomato crap dripping down his, but I think that red thing that drips all the way down, I think that's a cherry.
I don't know. I feel like cherry juice is much redder. But anyway, this is pointless. This isn't anything important. It's such a weird thing for us to talk about.
Let's talk about Pippin's song.
Okay. We actually have something to talk about there. Billy Boyd, he apparently wrote the melody for that song. And the lyrics itself, they gave him, I guess, a bunch of phrases and words to incorporate from the books, Tolkien's writing. But he actually wrote the lyrics and songs and melody using what they provided him. I want to say not many people had heard what he'd written before recording. And so he just got up there and he started singing and blew everyone away. Because, that moment, the amount of melancholy that he puts into that song.
Right.
Oh my gosh. I love sad music by itself already.
Especially when it's just so fitting for the story that's being told at that moment.
It's such a good moment.
And it's such a good song. He did such a good job. I think since we've talked about Denethor enough, we should bring the conversation up a little bit, maybe. I think we should discuss Aragorn just a little bit more before we decide to close this out.
Okay. I can talk about Aragorn a bit.
I figured you could.
Yeah, I love me some Aragorn.
Yes, who doesn't?
Speaking of Aragorn, I guess right before we get into his actual character, I kind of want to talk about the swords of Lord of the Rings real quick.
Yeah.
Connection to Aragorn being Anduril, of course.
Yeah.
Not just Anduril. Glamdring, Sting, Orcrist in The Hobbit. The swords in Lord of the Rings. There's something about a good sword in a fantasy series and the fact that there are so many named blades in this one. So many characteristics of good fantasy clearly stem from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And named swords, as integral as they are to fantasy, has to stem from Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
And in Lord of the Rings, no sword is bigger than Anduril. I mean, the broken blade, reforged, Blade of the King, the one that gives him the power to command the spirits of the dead.
Yeah.
Which actually, I don't know if the blade itself gives him that power. I wonder if it's more
I think it
his,
just comes from him.
Yeah, being the heir of Isildur.
Yeah.
But
he probably at that point could have held any.
Yeah. I mean, it is a symbol.
It is, because the blade was broken and it was reforged and everybody thought his line had been broken.
Mm-hmm.
And, he says it's been remade.
Exactly.
And so him carrying that sword, both of them, they fit together so well.
Yeah. And I love that they renamed it, but they kept it. It feels similar. Narsil to Anduril.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't remember what Narsil means, but Anduril meaning Flame of the West. I often forget that they refer to the good guys in the show as men of the West, the people of the West versus the East.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the book, I find it kind of interesting that he actually carried the shards of Narsil around with him.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to in the movie, the shards being displayed at Rivendell. And then another difference being before they set out on their fellowship, the blade is reforged at that point. So he carries Anduril with him from the beginning, practically.
Mm-hmm.
In the movies, he doesn't get it until Return of the King. Slight differences there. It definitely adds more weight to Anduril in the movies, waiting until the end for him to get the blade.
That's what I think, because he has to make a tough decision right then to go into the mountain to make the dead fulfill their oath.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fitting because up to that point, he still hasn't called himself the King of Gondor or decided to take up that mantle. But him taking the sword and going to fulfill his destiny, it all fits together so perfectly. And I love how they did it in the movie.
Yeah. And I've mentioned in one of the previous episodes that in the movie, Aragorn's journey seems to be him claiming more and more responsibility until he eventually claims the crown of Gondor.
Yes.
And him taking Anduril is basically the second to last step. It's the penultimate step to him taking on the crown. He's basically accepting that sword. It's him saying, all right, let's do this. I'm in it now. I'm accepting who I am and what I'm going to be. And I think that's structured so beautifully for his character in the movies. In the books, it's different. It's not bad. It's just more focus is put on other aspects of the story than the building of his character into the king. Because I feel like in the book, him taking the sword so early, it somewhat lessens the impact that it has on all of us. We don't care as much about it because it's like he's had it since the beginning.
No, and it's just a sword at that point. There's not much mystery behind it, I guess. It doesn't have as much weight as it does, being handed it at the end when, he's been denying who he is for all this time. Him having that sword and Gondor facing almost defeat and him coming in right at the end to save his kingdom, it fits together just so perfectly.
Yeah. Another difference between the book and the movies that I find interesting, though, in the book, there was some sort of prophecy that the true heir to the throne would have hands of healing or something like that. Mm-hmm. Basically have knowledge of healing that had been lost. And this is done through his knowledge of how to treat cursed wounds, because there are some people that had been injured by the Nazgul during the fight. And in the convalescence of the battle of Gondor, there are a lot of people who had been injured, obviously, by the Nazgul. And he tells them to treat the wounds with Kingsfoil, the weed that he mentions in the movie. And this is a sign to a lot of the people that remember these old prophecies that this man, he knows how to treat these curses. He knows how to heal people.
Yeah.
And that they start to look at him like, oh, crap, there might be something to this guy.
Yeah.
And then he steps up, by the way, I'm Isildur's heir. And like, we were calling it, man. We knew it. Like,
so we were all comparing notes over here.
It's different from how they portray it in the movies. I mean, in the movies, we don't get to actually see the populace's perspective on him stepping up to claim the crown.
Yeah.
It's just the battle happens. Then afterwards, he's in the throne room of Gondor, and he's, in the extended edition at least, picking up Denethor's Palantir and challenging Sauron.
The first time we see the Palantir that Denethor has.
Yeah, which is mentioned quite a lot in the... Actually, I don't know if it's mentioned a lot in the book, but it's insinuated that he's had it this whole time, and he's been able to talk with Sauron this whole time. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it has to explain why he'd been so crazy, but the fact that Sauron hadn't been able to manipulate him fully, something about Denethor, man. Dude was twisted, but at the same time, how did Saruman turn over and be like, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to serve Sauron over here? But Denethor's like, no, you know what, I'm just going to bully my son.
I mean, I think that's the evil that it took upon him. I think his hatred, his deep hatred for anything about Mordor is what kept him from becoming a servant of Sauron. But Sauron still used that because, I mean, in the end, he was basically sacrificing his men. I mean, a sane person wouldn't do that. So he had to be under Sauron's control a little bit.
Probably a little bit. Maybe not as directly as like someone moving a chess piece around like
no.
he's doing with
But just like
Saruman.
little things, like
Yeah.
little nudges here and there.
Yeah. Anyway, off topic from Aragorn, but yeah, that's 2 different ways that he steps up and claims the crown at the end in the book compared to the movie. Both kind of interesting.
Yeah. But since we're on the fields of Pelennor right now, I think we should talk about Theoden's speech.
Yes. Battle of Pelennor Fields is such an intense scene. And the way they do it in the movies, like the scale that they're able to portray in the films, just the massive orc army out in front of Gondor,
Mm-hmm.
and then the arrival of the Rohirrim. It's so good.
Mhm.
So good. And the fact that Theoden in that moment gets to be the rescuer, even though in the previous movie he was the one who needed rescuing,
Yeah.
feels in a way kind of poetic, like he gets a chance to stand on that hill
Yeah.
and charge down to save the people in need. It has a bit of poetry to it. Apparently, when they were actually filming that scene, though, the charging of the Rohirrim on Pelennor, Peter Jackson, I don't know if this is true or not. This is something that I've heard through rumor, but the rumor is that he apparently only allowed extras to ride in the front row of horsemen among the Rohirrim if they had read the scene in the books and could recite to him the details and the importance of the scene.
Really?
Yeah, he wanted the actors, even the extras, to love the story as much as he did.
Yeah.
So yeah, he rewarded the ones who cared as much as he did. Rumor has it he did this, but he rewarded them for caring about it. Even just the extras. Yeah, he had books all over the place that all the other main actors would pick up and read, so they were as into it as he was. But the fact that he pushed that on the little guys of the movie as well.
I mean, this is where it pays to be a nerd.
It is.
You spend all your time reading and everyone's like, oh, your nose is always stuck on a book. And I'm like, well, one day it'll pay off.
Yeah, and
I
this
will be
one-
in the front charge of the Rohirrim one day.
And speaking of the extras from the Rohirrim, they needed people to ride these horses for the extras, but they didn't have enough actors who knew how to ride horses. And so they just brought in people, just regular old people who owned their own horse in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And they're like, hey, bring your horse, bring yourself, and come ride your horse on camera. And a whole lot of these people were women.
I love it.
There's so many women
I love
in the
it.
film just wearing like red beards and stuff. And it's honestly kind of incredible. And I wish, some part of me wishes that he hadn't put beards on all of them so we could see that there were women in the army. Because I mean, how cool would that be? Just that would be a slight change.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they even have like the term Shield Maiden of Rohan, implying that they've had female soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
So why not just show that they had some women in their army?
Oh, it would have been good.
I think that would have been incredible.
I had heard about that too back when I was a teenager. And I was like, yes, ladies, thank you. I
Yes.
love it.
Such a fun fact
Mm-hmm.
to know that there was that big involvement and a story that has been, I think its main criticism, the only criticism that can ever be truly levied against Lord of the Rings, is that there are very few female characters in it,
Yes.
which is 100% fair.
Yes.
It's not something I can excuse away,
Mm-hmm.
but I can accept it and look past it just because of the time it came from and because of all the other incredible qualities that it has.
Yeah.
As long as people are learning from that and
Yes.
better,
and
which
doing better.
a lot of authors are. I think going back to that idea about removing some of those beards and showing some of the soldiers to be women, I think the only negative that would have come from that would have been slightly undercutting Éowyn's story, being a part of the charge and fighting in Pelennor,
Mm-hmm.
secretly hiding her identity as a soldier. I think it would have slightly undercut that because we would have been like, well, what's the big deal? There are other women fighting here too, when in the narrative that they showed us, she was the only woman on that battlefield. And being the one to then kill the Witch King, that's some big achievement for anyone.
Yeah.
And to walk away being like, I was the only woman on that battlefield and I killed the leader of their forces.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who's telling me to stay off the battlefield from this point on? I mean, because I dare
Right?
you to be the one. And I mean, speaking of the Witch King is such a menacing figure.
It really is, especially when he gets on the fell beast.
And the fact that him and his armor, I mean, the helmet that he puts over his hood, is the design they have for it. I love it so much. I love everything about it.
Yes.
Aesthetically, it's just like, it does things for me. I love the darker characters in fantasy, and finding a really well portrayed aesthetic of those darker characters makes me really, really happy. But yeah, the Witch King is probably one of my favorite villains in fantasy. There's a couple scenes in the movie that I kind of want to talk about.
Okay.
I do want to talk a little bit about the scene with Éowyn, about him and her, and the fact that she was able to kill him, and
Yeah.
the fact that leading up to this point, he was just one of the Nazgul. And then the third movie rolls around, and all of a sudden we realize that the Nazgul had a leader.
Yeah.
And he's more powerful than the rest of them, and he's
Yep.
menacing as hell. And the fact that there's a scene when he actually confronts Gandalf, who up to this point has been an unstoppable force. I mean, he killed a Balrog and came back. He's scared off the Nazgul with basically just a maglite. Gandalf up to this point has been intimidating. And in the movie, there's a scene when the Witch King confronts Gandalf and shatters his staff or something. Like, apparently that scene's kind of controversial to some fans.
Yes, because it didn't happen that way in the books.
Yeah, which I get it. I completely get it. Like, it kind of undercuts Gandalf's strength, but it definitely, in the movie, builds up the scene when he's killed by Eowyn. Because, like,
yes.
Holy shit.
Yes,
like,
this guy took down Gandalf, broke his staff.
But he scared a wizard. He scared one of the Maiar.
Yeah.
Like, this man is that powerful, that evil. And the fact that Eowyn was able to kill him, I mean, she didn't walk away unscathed, but at the same time, she was able to take him down.
Yeah.
Eowyn is such a badass.
Yes.
Which, I mean, that's one of the reasons I love such incredibly powerful dark characters,
Yeah.
because that gives you the opportunity to have a good character who's able to face that or somehow able to take that down, even if it hurts them or kills them, whatever sacrifice. Being able to create that contrast in another character means that you've done a good job with your evil character. And they did a really good job with Witch King.
They really did.
Speaking of the Witch King, we were watching Return of the King.
Last summer,
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was a rough watch through because we we paused it so many times.
And this was not because our mom walked in making fun of the scenes.
No, she wasn't there practically the entire time. We would just pause it and talk for like 30 minutes to an hour at a time. And these are pauses where we would hit play, 5 minutes later, hit pause and talk again. So yeah, we turned a 3-hour movie into it felt like
I think it took 2 days to watch it.
Something ridiculous.
Yeah, because I had to come back another day to finish it.
Yeah, and at that point it started to feel like homework. Like, come on, we know what's going to happen in this movie, but we couldn't stop pausing and talking. I mean, honestly, that session of just watching the movie and talking is probably what inspired us to. We need to just do a podcast so we can talk about all this stuff.
I think that was where it stemmed from.
Yeah.
But what started the pausing, though, is because we kept sending GIFs or memes to each other, mostly regarding Celeborn and Galadriel.
Yeah, because this is right after the
One Ring.
The One Ring series came out.
Yes, and so there was so many
Rings of Power.
memes. Oh, the Rings of Power,
that's what it is. The Rings of Power.
Yeah.
Right after that series came out. And
there's so many memes making fun of that, like, her saying her husband died. Yeah.
Yeah, like, Celeborn who?
And so we sat there for like hours, and then that led us into finding more Lord of the Rings memes in general.
So many.
And we would just like, wait, I got so many, push pause. And then we would put them up on the big screen. So we wouldn't even send them to each other at that point.
Yeah, it was in terms of absorbing the story and appreciating it, it was a bad session because we weren't paying attention at all. We would just, between, pausing, we're scrolling through our phone, looking at more and more memes. And we're just dying the whole time.
And this leads up to when we get to Minas Morgul.
Yes. So the scene of Minas Morgul.
So we're in a silly mood.
Yeah. We're just laughing already. We're dying. And, Frodo and Sam and Gollum, they go past, and there's that scene when Frodo stops and he's looking up at Minas Morgul, and there's that like drawbridge, and on either side of the drawbridge there are these two carvings of these menacing gargoyles. And
so this led us into like, it had to be at least 30 minutes.
I think what started it was I paused it there because I was like, oh yeah, so I learned this about Minas Morgul. Apparently it used to be Minas something else. It used to be a city it used to be a different city as part of the Gondor nation.
Yes.
And the forces of Mordor had captured it, and the Witch King claimed it as his own and renamed it to Minas Morgul. And we were sitting there thinking, like, hold on. So if this used to be a fortress of men, why are there evil gargoyles at the front? Yes. Do they just keep, or did they just hire a stone carver to come by?
Yeah, could you imagine the Witch King going out looking for like somebody to carve him some gargoyles?
Knock, knock, knock. I'm looking for the One Ring.
Yeah.
And someone to carve me some gargoyles. If you know anyone like that?
Yeah, I'm looking for a certain aesthetic for my new stronghold.
Yes, please. Come by, bring some of your work. We'd like to see what you do.
Yeah, if I don't like it, you will die.
Yeah, there's no chance of you going home again. I mean, we've got too many evil secrets over here.
Don't worry, there is at least 10 of you coming for the interview. Only one will make it out alive.
But benefits, if you are chosen, you get to stay here forever and make me gargoyle statues.
Yes.
Imagine
Continue
that.
to make this look like a menacing place. I don't like what Gondor did.
How many stone carvers get to say that they're on retainer for the Witch King of Angar?
Right?
Angmar.
No, you won't be paid. No.
No.
You will be paid with your life.
It's such a silly conversation, but we just laughed for
Forever.
so long
Yes.
about the idea of the Witch King of Angmar.
Searching for a stone carver.
There's some sculptor to make him gargoyles.
Sculptor, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, it was a good conversation. We laughed until we cried. We really did.
But yeah, that's one of the bits leading up to us deciding to do a podcast. That conversation there.
Yes.
That session. Since we mentioned Rings of Power, since this also kind of ties into Angmar,
Mhm.
I kind of want to quickly summarize something. I don't know who here has actually watched the Rings of Power. You know,
I'd say a fair few probably have, hoping that
Probably.
they were going to get back into the world of Lord of the Rings.
yeah, if you were a fan of Lord of the Rings and you probably jumped into Rings of Power with high hopes or at least just a desire for something good. And I'm sure a lot of us were disappointed. Sure, some of us took it at whatever value it offered.
Yeah.
It's not what we wanted, but it's a little bit of Middle Earth and we'll take it.
And that's how I felt.
Yeah, and that's fair. It had some value to it. I liked the actors that they chose to play Galadriel and Elrond. I think they were all really good.
I know you
Um,
didn't like Halbrand's actor. I liked him a lot.
So my thing, and this ties into Angmar, is I had a theory, and I shared this theory with you before we watched the final episode
Yes.
and stuff. I was hoping it was going to reveal that I was going to be right. A lot of the qualms I had with the show up to that point were going to be justified. Turns out my theory wasn't correct.
No.
And
it
I was
wasn't.
disappointed. Jessica wasn't because she wasn't really bought into my theory at the time. She was happy with the way the show went, which all's fair.
I don't know. I like a deeper look into Sauron. I know it didn't play into the lore very well, but I liked it.
I think that's fine. I just think in terms of like keeping Sauron as this menacing figure,
Yeah.
it kind of undercuts that when we have some,
And
when we
that's
try
why
to
it-
humanize it.
Yeah, and that's why it felt different for me. While I'm like, I'm not super upset like all these Lord of the Rings people who are into the lore and stuff, because it feels like a completely different story almost. So
Yeah. But my theory,
Yeah.
what I was hoping was going to happen, and that I still to this day am upset about because I still think it would have been an incredible twist.
yeah.
At that point, by the time we get to the final episode, basically, everyone's thinking like, okay, Halbrand's weird.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's
Just a
something going on there.
Weird guy, something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were just thinking like, they're going to make him Sauron, aren't
Yeah.
they? And they were right.
Yeah.
Spoilers, by the way. Halbrand turns out to be Sauron.
It's been out for a while.
It
We're not
has.
sorry.
But my whole thing was like, what if they built up this expectation, made him a red herring, and then Sauron shows up in his disguise as a messenger from the Valar, basically telling the audience, okay, Halbrand wasn't Sauron the whole time, but who is he? If this is actually Sauron, if this is the first time we're seeing Sauron for the entire series, then what the heck is going on with Halbrand?
Yeah.
My whole thing was that we knew the rings were going to be created in the series. We knew that we were going to get the 3 for the elves. We knew that there were going to be 7 for the dwarves and 9 for the men.
Mhm.
We knew all this stuff was going to get made. We knew the One Ring was going to get made. My whole thing was we need to see the people that receive these rings. We've already been to Numenor.
Yeah.
We're fairly certain that they're given to Numenorians.
Mm-hmm.
But what if one of the rings went to someone who's only been to Numenor?
Yeah.
What if it went to someone who had apparently been the heir to some sort of throne, but then tried to leave it and then came back to protect his people?
Yeah.
Which at that point Halbrand was claiming to be. So what if Halbrand ended up being the Witch King of Angmar?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's a character that we can easily humanize. Like, what if we were to dig into that character's background?
Yeah.
Like, what happened to him before he became corrupted and fell and so dark?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what if he actually, in this slightly time-altered version of Tolkien's lore, what if he actually knew Galadriel before he turned? What if
Yeah.
him and Galadriel were close?
Yeah.
What if this incredibly evil person, before he was twisted, could have gone down another path and helped destroy Sauron from the beginning? So that was my theory, that Halbrand was going to
And
end
it's
up
a
being...
good theory.
I thought it was... I was hoping they were going to do something like that.
Yeah.
And that Sauron would show up and be like, boom, I'm actually Sauron.
Yeah.
I'm here to trick you all and force you to make the rings for me.
Mhm.
And
But there
yada,
were just
yada,
so
yada.
many clues that it was going to be Sauron, you know, him
which is
being
why
a
I was
blacksmith.
hoping that they were
and-
being smarter about that. They were
I
trying to
know.
trick us.
I know.
Just
It would have been good. It really would have. So you need to move past it and just see the Rings of Power for what it is, which is, it's kind of a fun story. I like it.
I don't know if I'll ever be able to truly move past it, but I will most likely watch the next season if they release one.
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll see if it's enjoyable at that point.
Yes,
I don't
just
know.
don't look at it as like a, you know, a Lord of the Rings story. This is like fan fiction.
That's a fair way to look at it. Someone's twisted fan take on how things could have happened, potentially.
Yeah, and now there's like people shipping those two.
Sauron and Galadriel? Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
I don't feel good about it at all.
Like,
I don't like it.
That's weird. I mean, I understand the people who feel those urges because of Halbrand was portrayed. Like
and how they built that relationship up.
And I mean, Halbrand was portrayed by a very good-looking guy. I mean, Sauron was kind of a good-looking dude. So I get it, but no.
That's fair.
I just can't. I can't. Besides, she's a married woman.
No, her husband's dead.
Sometimes I can still hear
Remember,
his voice.
this is fan fiction. This is an alternate universe.
AU, Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth.
But anyway, this is making you upset, so I think we should move on to happier topics like, I guess it's not happy. Frodo and Sam and Gollum.
This movie's really dark. I don't know what other happy. I mean, until we get to the very end, there's no real happy stuff, and even then, it's really melancholic.
I don't think any of this makes you mad, though, like that show does.
So we can move back to things that actually make me happy. Yeah.
Well, I think we should talk a little behind the scenes about when Elijah Wood was all wrapped up in Shelob's webs. Yeah, so I was watching a video. I think it was last month. It was really cool. And we
haven't discussed this, so I don't know what's about to come. I haven't read the notes. I'm purposely not reading what you wrote down
because
I'm surprised. I want to be surprised by what you're about to say
because I have some behind the scenes information and you don't.
I feel like it's normally me. I normally dig up the good stuff, so I'm excited here.
Okay.
I haven't heard this.
First off, before we talk about the webs, I was watching an interview with Dominic Monaghan. He was talking about how the irony of Elijah Wood is that he has the biggest, bluest eyes. They're just so beautiful. But he's basically blind. You know, his
Elijah Wood is?
Elijah Wood. His vision just sucks.
I did not know that about him.
And so he has this theory because he can basically outstare anyone in a staring contest. So when he's laying there dead, basically Sam thinks he's dead, you know, he's staring and they could keep the camera on him for a long time because he could keep his eyes open so long. So Dominic Monaghan's his theory is that, you know, when you're a kid or you're a baby, you know, they can't really test for vision very well. And so they didn't know that he needed glasses. And so, you know, he couldn't see very well. And so his eyes were just so wide the entire time, just always open and wide, trying to take everything
Trying
in.
so hard to see.
So hard to see, yes. And so that's why he's like the world's greatest staring champion.
That's hilarious. He's been training his whole life.
Yes.
I hadn't thought about that because in that scene, he does just lie there with his eyes open.
Yeah.
No blinking. And I couldn't do it, but
and they were able to keep the camera on him for long periods of time and get those good shots of him looking dead because of that.
Good long shots of him just staring.
But getting back into the webs, they had him fitted for these webs that he was literally wrapped in. It wasn't just like a costume he put on and he kept his arms to the side. He was literally wrapped in these. And he was saying, oh, it's actually really comfortable. I wouldn't want to stay in it all day. No, he was in it all day long. He was literally in it all day long. And it made Sean Astin feel claustrophobic.
Even though he wasn't the one in the web?
Nope. And I understand that. I relate to that so well.
Interesting.
Watching someone get wrapped up like that, I would have felt claustrophobic too.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that at all. That's something new to me. I do have another little bit of behind the scenes for that scene, though. So I think it must have been when they were shooting pickups for that scene. After they'd done the initial photography and were doing editing, then they have pickups. For anyone who doesn't know, they do pickups where they just bring people back and shoot extra scenes or reshoot scenes that weren't shot the right way. So these are basically the very last bit of filming that they did. And they were shooting a pickup scene, I believe, for that scene with Frodo in the webs when Shelob's about to carry him away. And Sam shows up and he steps into frame holding Sting in one hand and the file of Galadriel in the other. He's about to fend off Shelob. I don't know if Sean Astin was busy or if he just couldn't make it to set, but the one shot that they needed, he really wanted just the scene of Frodo stepping into camera. Camera's far back away from Frodo in the webs, and Shelob's standing over him, and Sam just steps forward. We just see his arm holding Sting. And they couldn't get Sean Astin just for this one shot. They didn't know what to do. And so Peter Jackson's like, you know what? Just give me the cloak, give me the sword. He put on the cloak, he picked up Sting, and they started rolling, and he just stepped forward into frame.
No, really?
Yep, that's Peter Jackson holding Sting
in
that one shot of Shelob looking at Sam.
I need to go and see.
Which means he technically has 2 cameos in that film, because he's got a cameo in each of the films, but that one, he's got a second one.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's really good.
It's good stuff. Speaking of Sam, in the second film for our podcast, we had a quote from Sam at the end that really hit home for us. And as we were doing these notes, you mentioned that there was a specific quote from this one that hits home for you.
Oh, yes. So if any of you have learned anything about me so far by listening to these podcasts, it's that you know that I love a good quote. And while you listen to these, you will always have at least one quote from me in every podcast. So don't worry, I've got one waiting. This is when Gandalf and Pippin are sitting in Gondor and the orcs are trying to break down a door. And it looks like they're just taking a little bit of a break or
right before Rohan shows up.
Before Rohan shows up. And everything just feels hopeless at this point because Rohan to them has abandoned them. There's no one else coming and they're all going to die here. It's a very hopeless scene. Yeah. And Pippin looks at Gandalf and mournfully says, I didn't think it would end this way. Gandalf says, end? No, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The gray rain curtain of this world rolls back and all turns to silver glass. And then you see it. Pippin, what? Gandalf, see what? Gandalf, white shores and beyond, a far green country under a swift sunrise. Pippin, well, that isn't so bad. Gandalf, no, it isn't. I was 15 when this movie came out. It was just less than a month to my birthday. I was going to be 16, and that would make it almost 2 years since our dad had died. And at the time, death isn't a peaceful thing. It's this thing that rips families apart and creates hardships and trauma, and it sucks. But the scene, it broke me. I remember sitting in the theater crying, really trying not to cry, because at the time I wasn't a big crier. And so I always tried to hide my tears, but I was crying and I was trying to secretly wipe the tears away and stuff. But it struck a chord with me. And I remember feeling a little bit more peace and a little more acceptance of what kind of had happened in our life, our personal lives. But I remember that actually kind of being a turning point for me, even though it had been 2 years. You're thinking, well, haven't you moved on? And no, sometimes it's hard to move on and try to come to terms with what has happened to you. And I remember that next year had become a better year for me. I had kind of stepped out of the depression I was in. I'm not saying I owe it all to this, but I just remember this making me feel a little bit more peaceful. And as I was making these notes, I was actually making them on the anniversary of our dad's death. He died in January. And so when I was doing these notes, it kind of brought it all up again. And I remember I watched the scene again and kind of got all teary again, even though it's been 22 years.
Yeah, this scene, Billy Boyd and Ian McKellen together, their portrayal of it is so tender and just full of emotion.
Yes.
I mean, the way Gandalf portrays it, I mean, contextually it makes sense because he's trying to comfort Pippin, who worries he's about to die, and Gandalf honestly doesn't know that they're about to be saved, so he thinks there's a good chance that Pippin's about to die here. Gandalf being an immortal soul, knowing that if his body dies, he's probably just going to return to the Valar.
Mm-hmm.
He's not worried about himself. He's concerned for Pippin's well-being, and he wants to comfort him. And taking that as a viewer, it's easy to view that not as him giving comfort to this other character, but as just giving comfort to a listener in general. And so it feels like situation you were in, the situation anyone is in who's watching it and needs some comfort on the subject of death. I think that's a really, really easy scene to become emotional at.
I mean, we all kind of want to feel that there's more to this afterwards, that, when we lose somebody or we're going to die, that's not it. That's not the end, that it is going to be a better place, that we are going to see each other again. That's kind of a hope I think we all want to live with, no matter what religion you're part of.
I mean, we can get into the weeds of this is fantasy, this isn't real life. But at the end of the day, knowing that we don't know and that no one truly knows, regardless of their faith or whatever they believe and what they want to believe, knowing is something that escapes all of us. And so even though this is something that comes from fantasy, and I know that the Grey Havens aren't waiting for us on the other side, the idea, the hope that perhaps something peaceful is waiting on the other side, there's some sort of comfort to that. And knowing that people that we've lost could be going to a place like that. Yeah, this scene, this quote in particular always strikes a chord with me, even though I don't remember personally how I felt when I first saw it, because I was 9 years old when it came out. So
yeah, you don't even remember the theater hopping. So
yeah, but yeah, it's such a good scene.
It is.
Before we get too far from the Grey Havens, we've talked a little bit about Howard Shore and his scores
in
these episodes. I feel like he deserves a podcast episode all on his own.
He really does.
Such a phenomenal job in the music and all these movies. there's so much more to talk about. And so just to briefly give him his due
Yes.
in this episode, and since we just spoke about the Grey Haven,
Yeah.
the theme he wrote for the Grey Haven, it plays twice in the third movie, from what I remember. Actually, it probably plays a couple more times, but it plays 2 times in 2 different versions that I really, really love. It plays once when Gandalf starts to describe the Grey Havens to Pippin. I love that the music is silent right up until Gandalf says the words White Shores. White Shores, and then the music comes in all gentle.
It's such good music.
It really is.
I had it playing while I typed up the conversation we just had.
It's so, so good. And the second time it plays is when Frodo and Sam are climbing Mount Doom, and Frodo is struggling, and he falls, and he says he can't do it. He can't climb anymore. Sam tells him that, I can't carry this burden for you. I can't carry the ring for you, but I can carry you. And he picks him up, and up to that point, the Shire theme had been playing. It wasn't the complete Shire theme. Chords were missing, and it was fumbling. Very, very reminiscent of where Frodo and Sam were story-wise.
Yeah.
These are 2 hobbits that are lost, and they're far from home and no real hope of getting there.
Yeah.
And instead of the triumphant music that comes in being a version of the Shire theme, it's a version of the Grey Havens theme, the theme of the afterlife in a way, which kind of feels like they know that they're not going home at this point.
It's like Sam accepting their fate.
Yeah, that's another scene that hits me because we've already got that music connected to the quote from Gandalf about the Grey Havens. We know that this music is connected to death, and that the fact that this music comes in at that scene with Sam and Frodo, I mean, it nails home for a lot of us that Sam, who has been holding on to hope this whole time that they would get back, has accepted that they're not going home.
They're not going home. Because he hasn't up until that point. Everything was about when we get back home. He says it multiple times throughout these movies about going back home.
The journey home.
The journey home, yeah. And so it's right there, I feel that it hits him that we aren't going back home. I'm okay with that. And I'm going to do everything. Yes, we're going to get it done no matter what I have to do.
Howard Shore.
He killed it.
His music has a place in my heart for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Always.
But I mean, talking about good speeches, Aragorn's speech.
Yes. After mustering the army of the West and riding to the Black Gates to distract Sauron.
Yeah, with his crown on his head.
Yeah, his first true speech as a king. And I think it's a really good speech.
It is.
Because version of it in the movies feels very reminiscent, like almost a mirror of his journey from the first movie to this point in the third. It doesn't start off stumbling, but it starts off feeling awkward almost. It's sort of like you could hear a pin drop type of energy in a way, even though they're in the middle of an amassed army in front of the Black Gates of Mordor. It feels a little bit awkward and stilted, and like Aragorn doesn't exactly know where he's going with this. He's trying, which is sort of where he's at the beginning in terms of his leadership and his position as soon-to-be king. He doesn't really want to do that. He doesn't want to take up the mantle of king.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to lead the fellowship. He's going to let Gandalf do that. But as his journey went on, he became more and more comfortable with leadership, claiming more and more responsibility. And as his speech goes on, begins to feel, I think, with a bit more confidence.
Yeah.
And his speech begins to feel more rousing. And by the end of it, I mean, you're with him. Like, he's about to charge off into basically certain death. And I would have done the same thing. I would have followed him. I would have gone straight at that army of orcs with him. And I think that mirrors his journey really, really well.
I agree.
There's also another speech. I kind of skipped over it because I wanted to come back to it specifically and tie it into this speech from Aragorn. But there's another speech by another king in this movie, and that's Theoden's speech from the charge of the Rohirrim back at Pelennor. And to compare those 2 speeches, there's a lot of differences. If I were to choose a favorite, it would probably be Theoden's, to be honest. But they're both incredible speeches, and they're so different that it's hard to say one is better than the other. But Aragorn, when he gave his speech, he was trying to set a context for the soldiers. He was trying to offer them a reason to be there and fight, even though they just won this victory and now they're here potentially fruitlessly about to die at the hands of all these orcs. And that was his job. He had to talk. He had to provide words and context to them. Theoden, on the other hand, had just led his people to war, not to protect their own lands, not to save their own people, but to protect their allies. This is after him and his people have already fought and suffered and lost countless lives.
And they arrive at the battle and see how many they have to fight versus how many there are of them.
Yeah, and while there are a huge number of men on horseback there, there's a field full of orcs.
Yeah.
And it's daunting. And Theoden, he doesn't need to provide context to these men. They all know what they're there for. He just needs to stoke their courage and their sense of honor.
Mm-hmm.
And so his speech is far more simplistic. It's loose words almost, just thrown together. Imagery of battle and calls to honor and death and dying in glory and in sacrifice. Rewatching that speech, the simple language of it all is so at contrast with the power that he's able to provide all these soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
They come to this battle knowing that there's a good chance a lot of them, if not all of them, are going to die.
Yes.
They're
It's
not
almost
there.
a suicide mission.
Yeah. They're not there with the hope of winning the day.
No.
They're there because honor has called them to protect their allies.
Yeah.
And they know that if they don't fight here, then the orcs are going to take Gondor and come for them next anyway.
Yeah. So they're there hopefully to just put a dent in this army.
Yeah. And they don't know Aragorn's plan. They don't know that Aragorn's going to basically come around the corner with an army of spirits and destroy all the orcs and save the day. They don't know this. They legitimately think that they're going to die. And so Theoden's job is to encourage them.
Give them a little more hope, boost them up a little bit. Basically, you're not dying in vain.
Exactly. But yeah, something about the fact that all these men know that they're going to their deaths, and Theoden's simple language is enough to stoke their energy and make them charge as valiantly as they do. It's one of my favorite speeches in all movie history.
It reminds me of in The Way of Kings when Dalinar and Sadeas go to the tower to fight together, and Sadeas leaves him and Dalinar and his men are trapped. And I wonder if Brandon Sanderson wrote the speech that Dalinar gave, which I read in a previous episode, with this in mind, if this was his inspiration for that, because, you know, the speech Dalinar gave wasn't one of victory on the battlefield, like, here we are, we're going to crush our enemies. No, we're men of honor, and that's why we're here right now, and we're going to give them everything we have. We're going to go down fighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Theoden's speech, there's definitely a journey before destination feel to
right?
it.
Yeah.
100%. And I love that. And I think that's probably why I love it so much, because Sanderson has ingrained those thoughts into my head at this point. And so part of me wants to pick those out as I read them or watch them.
But I think that brings us back home again.
Back to the Shire.
Yeah, we've pretty much talked about everything that we wanted to. And so, yeah, I think our hobbits have finally made it back home after everything that they've been through. And, you know, not to bring it back down again, but I'm going to do it a little bit because that's who I am. But the hobbits, they return to the Shire, you know, nothing is different about it. And I know that's different from how they have it in the book. You know, we had the whole sacking of the Shire in the book, and they basically had to go and free the Shire after everything that they'd already done. But in the movie, it's different. Everything is the same. They return home and basically nothing is how they left it. And the hobbits are riding in, they look different. And how I have always imagined this scene is when like something tragic or traumatic happens in your life. Say a loved one is incredibly sick or something tragic happened to a loved one or they died, and you go home and everything is still the same. Your neighbors are still going about their day. People are still going to work. People are still getting their groceries and paying their bills and doing everything. And it feels weird to you because your entire world has shifted. And in your mind, everything should have changed as well. So to come and find everything the same, it's like your brain can't even comprehend that everything's still the same when everything is just so different. And I guess I kind of feel like the hobbits coming back to the Shire and seeing that everything is the same just didn't feel right to them because their entire world has changed. It's shifted. Nothing is the same anymore, but they come back to the Shire and everything is the same.
Yeah. The differences between the movie and the book, I think, are very significant for two different time periods and two different audiences.
Mm-hmm.
I think the original Returning to the Shire from the book that Tolkien wrote was very significant for the mid-1900s European audience that was reading it because a lot of soldiers went off to war and then came home and their home had been affected by that war, which is what happened to the hobbits. They come back to the Shire and it had been affected. You know, the scouring of the Shire, everyone had been touched by that war. And he portrayed that really well. And I think that really strikes a chord for a lot of audiences at that time and in that place. Nowadays, though, for a modern audience from like year 2000, 2003, soldiers quite often come home from war to a country that looks fine.
Might not even know what's going on.
Yeah. People that we send overseas to fight quite often come back and nothing has changed over here for the rest of us. We're still living our best life.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, they've spent who knows how long.
Seeing the worst of humanity.
Exactly. And I think that change is very significant for the films because the fact that they came home and everything's the same in the Shire and they feel out of place, it is a good representation of a lot of the people who experience stuff like that these days. We live in a world where parts of our world can be ravaged by war and disease and who knows, however many awful things. And yet other parts of the world are untouched havens, basically.
Yeah.
And people can go from one to the other and back. And no one in that haven realizes that the journey that these people have been on has changed who they are, has been traumatic and just utterly and completely life-altering.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that change is very, very significant. In terms of changing things from the source material, leaving out the scouring of the Shire, not only saved time because it was an already long movie, but I think it helps strike a chord for some audience members in our world today. It helps represent the story of a lot of people in our world today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to Frodo and Bilbo leaving for the Grey Havens. And I remember this was a hard scene for me to watch because, I mean, you know me, I hate endings. I have a really hard time with any kind of ending. I don't want it to end. I want more, more, more. I've got issues, I know. But it was a good ending. And it was so fitting for these two ring bearers. Bilbo willingly gave up the ring for Frodo, something that had never been done before. And Frodo spent who knows how long trying to destroy this ring. And while the ring was simultaneously trying to destroy him. And so it was a fitting end for both of them to be able to go to the Grey Havens with the rest of the elves leaving Middle-earth. It was just hard.
Yeah. Slight side note before we continue with the Grey Havens bit, but because you mentioned Bilbo, I wanted to kind of mention something real quick. Both Bilbo and Gollum found the ring and took it with them. But the ring affected them differently, even though Bilbo didn't have the ring as long as Gollum. You know, one could argue that if he'd kept it as long, he would have ended up like Gollum. But I don't think he would have. He would have been twisted, I think, but I don't think he would have been as evil as Gollum.
I don't think so either.
Because of the nature and the way that they took the rings. Gollum killed Deagle to take the ring. Bilbo spared Gollum when he took the ring.
That's right.
Night and day difference between the two and how they claimed that ring. And I think Gollum killing Deagle allowed the ring to immediately enter his mind.
Oh, yeah.
Just, immediately. Whereas Bilbo, he wasn't as vulnerable to it. Worked its magic on him for quite a while, and it wore him down.
Yeah.
By the end, he felt like butter spread over too much toast. But he wasn't twisted and evil.
Which is why, in the end, he was able to get rid of it. As hard as it was for him to do, he was able to get rid of it.
I hadn't brought that up earlier because I hadn't thought about it. But that was something that I came across a couple weeks ago. Someone had been talking about the way Bilbo and Gollum claimed the ring.
Yeah.
You know, one through death and one by sparing someone's life.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting.
I never even put those together. I didn't even think about it.
I hadn't thought about it either, but very significant. I love that little detail. The finale of Return of the King, them going off together, it's tough. It's a sad scene, but I mean, character-wise, knowing the evil that these two individuals had carried with them, especially Frodo carrying it when the ring is basically at its worst, knowing that it's about to die and probably throwing every ounce of its power at Frodo's mind the entire time he carried it. They need some sort of healing.
Yeah.
So it makes sense for them to go off. But in terms of the movie and the filming leading up to that, the scene of them leaving, there's that scene with Frodo sitting in his study, writing in the book, writing out his story.
Yeah.
In the same book that Bilbo had written out his story. The scene when Sam shows up and he sees what he's working on and says, "Yay, you finished it." And Frodo says, "Not just yet. There's still room for a little more."
Yeah.
During the production of the movie, they had to shoot pickups for Return of the King. That scene was the very last pickup shot that they did with Elijah Wood. It was the very last footage of Frodo ever filmed for the 3 movies.
It was not just the last scene for Frodo. It was the last scene that they were ever going to shoot for the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Right. And apparently, because it was the last scene, and because they'd spent years working on these films, it was very emotional for all of them, but none more so than Peter Jackson.
Yep.
Apparently, during that scene, when they were shooting, Peter Jackson had them record more takes than is normal.
Yeah.
So apparently, on set, whenever they would be filming takes, Peter Jackson, after they do a couple takes and he thinks that they've got it, he'll call cut and like, he has some sort of word.
Yeah, something like that's a wrap or something, you know,
like
director's
we've got to
speech.
go ahead and cut that or something. Yeah, something like that. They did like 3 or 4 takes, and everyone on set at the end of the takes started to look at Peter and be like, okay, probably going to call it now.
Yeah, because they knew that they had it.
Yeah.
They had it takes ago.
But he did another take, and they looked at him. He didn't call it, and they did another take. They kept looking at him. He didn't call it, and they just kept going and going and going. And like, what is going on? Like, it's just, we're doing take after take after take. And Elijah Wood's just up there just acting his heart out for who knows however many takes. And I think everyone knew that he didn't want it to end. He didn't want the filming to stop. And eventually he had to call it. And so he called it, and everyone clapped, and Peter Jackson walked right up to Elijah Wood and wrapped his arms around him and just said, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And if you can actually go and watch that last recording on YouTube, and it's pretty emotional.
Yeah. I think Viggo Mortensen and Dominic Monaghan were on set that day. I think the two of them were watching them film that, among who knows, however many other staff members.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was emotional for everyone in the room, knowing that this culmination of more than 3 years of their lives is coming to an end.
Yeah. It makes me love Peter Jackson in a really visceral sort of way. The fact that he cared so much about this story that knowing that his work on it was coming to an end brought him to tears like that. That's a man who cares about what he's working on. That's someone who loves what he's done and what he's working on.
He put his heart and his soul into these movies. And you can tell that the person who did this just loved it so much. I mean, he brought these stories of fantasy to a new generation. The older generations, they had the books and they read it. But there's a good chance I never would have picked up these older books and read them. And he brought these stories to me, to us. And it launched our obsession with these epics, with these wonderful stories. And honestly, it's all thanks to Peter Jackson. Like, I was a reader before Peter Jackson came along, but I was not a reader of these epics. And I am now because of him.
Yeah, a whole generation of fantasy lovers. Unabashedly, I would say, owe their thanks to Peter Jackson.
Yes.
Like, the benchmark in fantasy that is the Lord of the Rings films is easily, I would say, easily the thing that has spurred fantasy onto being the phenomenon that it is today among books, movies, TV shows, games, everything. Without Peter Jackson's trilogy, half, if not more, of the content that we have today doesn't exist.
Yep.
Lord of the Rings by itself, phenomenal. The book's phenomenal. Tolkien's work, just untouched.
Yes. I mean, he is the father of fantasy. He is. And all of the credit goes to him. But the credit for this new generation of fantasy lovers, it goes to Peter Jackson for sharing Tolkien's story.
1000%. We love these movies so much. I mean, we've tried. We've spent several hours trying to put our emotions into words and articulate the feelings. But at the end of the day, the simplest way of expressing it is just to say that we love these films.
Yes. And thank you to the people who made the films possible.
Yes. Thank you, Peter Jackson. Thank you, Philippa Boyens. And thank you, Fran Walsh.
Yes.
The work that the three of you did just blows my mind, being able to take this story and bring it to us for a new age and do it in a way that was respectful of the source material and just
make it more relevant for the times that we're in now.
Exactly. Phenomenal, phenomenal work. Can't say any more good things about it than we already have, but we probably will. We'll probably call back to Lord of the Rings constantly
I'm sure we will.
in further episodes.
And that brings us to the close of our 4th episode.
Yep. Thank you guys for listening to our Lord of the Rings episodes. We hope you've enjoyed them. We've put a good bit of work into them.
We have. And if you're joining us next time, we are going to be discussing the Mistborn trilogy.
By Brandon Sanderson.
Era 1 only. So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend reading it. You are going to love it, and we are going to dive into it in our next episode.
Yes, for anyone interested in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, he himself recommends starting with Mistborn as the entrance into his world.
And I always, anytime somebody's looking for book recommendations, especially for like their teenagers who love fantasy, that's exactly what I recommend. Get into Mistborn.
Yeah, I don't know if I would classify Mistborn as preteen fantasy or like young adult fantasy necessarily.
No, but it's more of an easier read compared to Stormlight.
Yeah.
And my goal is always to get people into Stormlight, so let's start with something that's not so hard to digest.
Yeah, not that Mistborn is technically adult fantasy. There's nothing quite like that.
No.
But it definitely doesn't feel like young adult fantasy.
No.
Yeah,
You'll love it. Trust me. Yeah. Try it. And then send us some emails with your thoughts, and maybe we'll get you in our next episode.
Yes, please do, guys. But we're going to cut it here, and we're going to go play Magic the Gathering.
We are.
Thank you guys for listening.
Bye.